Our next speaker, Ms. Geetha, has led curriculum enhancements for the DAS through essential literacy approach and the current integrated curriculum. She has presented in several conferences and holds a master's in English and a postgraduate certificate in learning and teaching in higher education. With over 10 years of experience supporting children and adults in the area of dyslexia, Geetha constantly aspires to map the way for young dyslexics to live a life of beauty and promise through a comprehensive, high-quality service provided by inspired staff. Now, Geetha's topic today is on moving forward with dyslexia support in Singapore. We would now like to invite Ms. Geetha Shantha Ram, Director of MOE-aided DAS Literacy Program, Dyslexia Association of Singapore, to come on stage for her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to present at the UnITE SpLD 2016 conference. And as my title indicates, I'm going to be talking about dyslexia support in Singapore. And as my subtitle suggests, it's got something to do with the fridge. No eggs, no coffee beans, and no potatoes, but something to do with the fridge. So I don't know if you've noticed this at home, but I have. My 6-year-old and my 4-year-old will constantly make trips to the kitchen, open up the fridge door, stick their heads into the depths of the fridge, and re-emerge like many, many moments later, sometimes with nothing, sometimes with something really small and obvious, like, I don't know, a bottle of Yakult, a yogurt drink. And I've observed this so many times that most recently I decided I need to investigate this a little bit more. So this time my son goes into the kitchen, opens up the fridge, sticks his head into the depths of the fridge, and then I decide it's my turn to ask the question. Buddy, what are you looking for? Something to eat? What do you want to eat? I'm looking. So unbeknown to me, my 6-year-old was given an honorary doctorate in being evasive, right? So I say, okay, I'm just going to wait and see how this plays out. And moments later, he comes out holding a slice of cheese in his hand. And so I'm all ready. I'm going to put on my parent voice and I'm going to say, you need to be more observant because that slice of cheese was right in front of you all this time. And then I said, wait, teaching moment. I am going to make him more self-aware. I'm going to question him so that he realizes he needs to be more observant. So I say, son, was that what you were looking for? And his reply, no, but there's nothing else, is there? Okay, so my plans to raise his self-awareness were thwarted, right? But then I was hit by an epiphany of sorts. All of us sometimes have this feeling of need, a void that we want to fill. And sometimes we know exactly what we need in order to satisfy that need. And we go out and we reach and we take it. But sometimes what we need is not available. What do we do? Now, shift that conversation to dyslexia. And 3 pertinent questions surface. First, we need to know what our learners need. We need to be very clear on what they require. And then we need to find out what's available in order to fill that need, to meet that need. But what happens if what they need is not available? What do we do? In 2015, 3 students from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy put together a paper called Expanding the Provision for People with Dyslexia in Singapore. It turned out to be a monumental paper because it provided a comprehensive review of what was available in Singapore for learners with dyslexia. They did this through by taking 3 approaches. One, they did a very comprehensive and thorough literature review on the provisions that were required for learners with dyslexia and for the people supporting them. They compared what was available in developed nations to what was available in Singapore. And thirdly, and most importantly, they had conversations with the main players who support learners with dyslexia, mainly the Ministry of Education, the Dyslexia Association of Singapore, and parents of children with dyslexia. So my presentation today is based on this paper, and I will provide you with a summary of what the findings were. And later on, at the end of the presentation, I will show you the reference so that you can read the article, which is available in a journal. So let's dive straight into current provision. Now, for the ease of understanding, I've broken this up into 3 broad categories. We have identification, which sets the ball rolling. Then we have intervention, which follows identification. And of course, resources, which prop up both identification and intervention in terms of support. So straight on into identification. Now, the paper reported that some countries would approach identification through a systematic screening, which means that all children of a particular age at a particular level were screened such that they could be identified for literacy delays or difficulties. Now, obviously, the benefits of that would be that you're able to capture the large group of students who will require support and further intervention. The criticism on that movement, of course, is that it's time-consuming, it's costly, it eats into the resources, and perhaps the biggest criticism of all is that it's almost over-reliant or over-indulgent when it comes to testing. There's over-testing of all children. Whereas other countries choose something like selective identification, where teachers, parents, professionals who are working with children identify these children for further either support or further evaluation. So in investigating this, the researchers found that Singapore took an in-between approach, where it combined both systematic screening and selective identification. So as we know, in primary 1, all children are screened for literacy delays, and if they do show to have significant difficulties, then they are put into the Learning Support Program, or LSP for short. Beyond that, teachers and parents are able to identify children for further support. The DAS, Specialized Educational Services Preschool Program, is an example of that. Children who are on that program are not diagnosed as dyslexic. Instead, they are students or children who have been identified to need additional intervention or help. And through this program, they intend to bridge that gap when they enter the primary levels. From identification, we move on to assessments, the more formalized assessment. And assessments, as we know, can happen as early as 6 years, as long as the child has received some intervention or support, so that we can put aside the concern of whether the child has been exposed to the language sufficiently. And so, again, teachers and parents are able to identify children for further assessments. And in the DAS, for instance, we see referrals coming through from all these sources. We also know that children on the Learning Support Program who have not made sufficient progress are put through for an assessment such that they may be able to enter the School-Based Dyslexia Remediation Program, or SDR, that's run by MOE. Now, as a product of this system, in 2013, it was reported that 6,063 children were diagnosed with dyslexia. So from identification, we move on to intervention. Now, we all know that learners with dyslexia need support in a variety of programs. It's not just English literacy. We also know that opportunities to receive intervention needs to be increased. So what does Singapore offer? Singapore offers in-school support through SDRs for primary 3 and primary 4 students, and off-site funded support through the MOE-aided DS literacy program. We also know that in addition to the primary 3 and primary 4 students that are supported in SDR, the DAS takes in an age range of 5 to 17-year-olds. And recognizing the fact that they need more than English literacy, we also provide programs in math, exam skills, Chinese, and speech and drama arts in an attempt to cover more programs to support the learners. Access arrangements. Now, Richard Lavoie famously said that being fair is not about giving everyone the same thing, but rather it's about giving everyone what they need in order to access opportunities equally. So the Singapore Examinations and Assessments Board does provide access arrangements or accommodations for learners who are taking examinations. There is a range that's available, and it's meant to meet the needs of the learners. So extra time, large fonts, and even readers are available to learners in order for them to access the examination equally. And of course, inclusion. Singapore takes a very strong position when it comes to inclusion. And as a result of this, all children have access to an education, and through the mainstream education, have access to the resources and facilities that come with it. Perhaps the biggest advantage of inclusion is the fact that we are able to break down barriers, and the students, the learners, are able to experience and understand the differing needs of our learners and work together in a community that is aware, not just tolerant, of the differences. And if you recall Lian Foundation paper that suggests that Singapore has a way to go before we are ready to call ourselves an inclusive society. And finally, resources. Training to teachers. The Rose report said that a program is only as good as the people who deliver it. So teachers have always been and will always be instrumental in the success of a program. In 2005, pre-service teachers attended a 12-hour program which covered special needs. In 2011, this was increased to between 24 and 36 hours. The teachers trained in special needs, the TSNs, attend a 108-hour certificate-level course. And the allied educators, we have one allied educator in every primary school and in some secondary schools, attend a one-year diploma in special education. The DAS is very committed to teacher training as well. And so all educational therapists are expected to complete a specialist diploma in educational therapy at the onset of their employment, which includes a 6-month mentoring program. And by the end of their 3rd year, are expected to have a postgraduate qualification in special needs. What about research and collaboration? It's not just about initial training, but about ongoing development, right? Continuing professional development. And at the same time, it's about collaborating because it's not, we can learn from the experiences of others. And so there are many opportunities in Singapore for us to do this. The Asia Pacific Journal of Developmental Differences is fairly localized in the information that it provides. A conference such as this, the UnITE SpLD conference, is a great opportunity for us to learn from each other. And the Early Childhood and Special Education's Needs Education Academic Group is another opportunity or a platform. And this is, of course, just a snapshot of what's available. Continuing on with resources still, technology. And we just heard from June about how important technology can be in being flexible in our approach to teaching. And we know technology is very important because it levels the playing field for our learners. And it enhances motivation. A recent study at the DAS showed that when we employed the use of technology in the classroom, students felt more motivated about learning and, in fact, improved behavior as well. We know that it at times can reduce the stress as much as it can cause stress for some, right? It does reduce stress because for some children, dealing with technology means that they are judged less than dealing with people. And so that's something we need to work with, but it provides them with an outlet to gain knowledge without being felt or without feeling pressurized. And of course, it naturally lends to an active learning environment and collaboration. Through e-learning weeks and the use of devices, the mainstream education includes technology. The DAS too implements technology in its classroom through the use of iPads, smart boards, and smart bars. And finally, parent education. We know that parents are the voice of our learners, and we know that they are instrumental in the solution that we offer our learners. And in Singapore, funding is available for parents to upgrade and empower themselves to better understand what they can do for their learners. We know that there are courses, as June has also shown us, some academy courses and workshops that we can attend. And to date, this year, the DS Academy has run about 13 workshops for parents, and parents have benefited from it. There are awareness talks and events, and of course, parent support groups. We have a very active parent support group on Facebook, which shows again that being a parent of a learner with dyslexia, it doesn't have to be a lonely task. It's not a lonely journey. It's possible for us to gain inspiration from others who are in a similar situation. So at this point, I just want you to sit back, pat yourself on the back and say, well done, good job. The little red dot has come a long way. Smile, relish the moment. Now ask yourself, are you content? Is this enough? See, the thing is, good, and it is good, but good is not enough if better is possible. And we know better is possible because there are certain weaknesses in the provision that we provide, and that can be improved. So let's take a look at what can be improved, or what are the concerns that we might have. So taking the international, and Singapore agrees with this figure, between 4 to 10% of a population may have dyslexia, with 4% having dyslexia severe enough to warrant intervention. So if we do some math, that comes up to about 20,000 school-going children. And if you recall the figure, 6,063 children were diagnosed with dyslexia in 2013. That leaves us with a gap of 14,000 children. 14,000 children who have potentially fallen through the cracks. Our screening process needs to be improved. And you may ask yourself why that is. And the paper suggests that this is because there is an over-reliance on the individual. That just like no two children are alike, no two parents are alike, no two teachers are alike, and perhaps some individuals do not feel confident or ready to move their children on to being identified or even receiving intervention. And perhaps that has led to the reduced numbers that we see. In trying to better understand this, the researchers probed this further. And this resonates with what MOE felt, was that public awareness needs to be increased in order for us to raise these numbers further. What about intervention? We do a lot for our learners with dyslexia, but is it enough? Again, taking the figure of 6,063 diagnosed dyslexics. To date, MOE reports that the SDR program has served 1,500 children. The DAS saw to about 3,000 children in 2015. So altogether, that's about 4,500 children supported, with 6,063 children identified. Again, there is a gap. Where are these children going? And we talk about the age range for provision. And the SES preschool service is an initiation to that cause. We've heard from Professor Fawcett about the importance of early intervention to prevent the expression of dyslexia. It's something that we can do. We've also heard from Lois about the significant gains a child who has received intervention early can make, given the right intervention. So there's a definite call for early intervention, and the preschool population, therefore, needs more support to prop this up. But beyond preschool, what about post-secondary, tertiary students, students in HE, higher education, and further education? Are our schools ready to support them? Is there sufficient support in the higher education institutions? And of course, our learners don't stop being dyslexic once they graduate from school. They become dyslexic employees. Is the workplace supportive? Is it ready to accept dyslexics? And finally, rightfully so, we focused a lot of our attention on English literacy. But it's about time we recognize that more, again, is required. Subject-specific programs, history, geography, these are topics these are areas that our dyslexic learners will continue to need support in. And access arrangements. In trying to understand this better, the researchers spoke with parents of learners with dyslexia, and their concern was that there didn't seem to be consistency in how these accommodations were being given or provided. So they felt that they did not know how to achieve that support for their learners, for their children. Beyond that, they also felt that there was no disclosure, no transparency on what accommodations are available. And so perhaps the call is for more clarity on how access arrangements are provided. And finally, inclusion or physical integration. Now, we know that inclusion is highly dependent on the environment and the teachers, who therefore drive that environment. And due to perhaps many limitations, such as, again, time, resources, facilities available, inclusion may not always be achievable. It is a noble end state, but is it always achievable? And so at best, for many students, what they receive is physical integration, not inclusion. And the researchers questioned whether this would be fair, especially for learners who have dyslexia severe enough to warrant specialized help. Finally, resources. In overseas countries, 70% of teachers working with children who have needs, special needs, have at least a master's degree. And that's followed through with 150 hours of a comprehensive and organized training program. Singapore needs to do a lot more in order for us to move forward in terms of getting our teachers truly prepared and ready for what we need to do to support our learners at the various ages. And we know that in 10% of teachers in primary schools and 20% of teachers in secondary schools are TSNs. And if the call is really to move towards inclusive education, then these numbers need to go up as well in order for us to fulfill inclusive education at its best. And while we know and acknowledge that technology is important for us, not enough of it is being employed in the classrooms. So this was a study by SpLD, formerly known as the Society for the Physically Disabled, and they found that 34% and 37% of teachers and therapists used technology in their classroom. Only 34% and 37%. Of the parents surveyed, only 6% said that their children use technology in schools. We need to do something about how we employ technology better in the classrooms. And finally, parents want to feel more knowledgeable. They want power. They want to understand what they need to do in order to support their learners, their children better. And so more parent education is required. So these were the findings from the paper. And we ask ourselves, why is this important? Because if 4% of our school-going population has dyslexia severe enough to warrant intervention, well, that's 20,000 children. 20,000 children whose hearts, minds, and lives we can touch if we do things right. And if we recall the figures provided by Professor Fawcett on the prison study, 53% of the prison population was found to have dyslexia. The social implications of not doing enough is quite significant. So the paper concludes with 5 recommendations. The first, of course, is to harmonize efforts, that the main players in support of children with dyslexia work together, the MOE as well as DAS, to come together and streamline their processes and intervention in order to provide support that is highly complementary. The paper also suggests that we need to expand continuing professional development for our professionals working with such children. It throws out the question, is it time we consider a specialist school for children who have severe needs when it comes to dyslexia? That we should do more when it comes to technology, and not just with regards to learning, but to begin to consider the use of technology during examinations as access arrangements, as a means to gather an understanding of what the child knows. And finally, it recommends a public awareness campaign where knowledge, understanding, and the way forward when it comes to dyslexia support in Singapore is talked about and discussed and raised. So, we must remember, we tell this to our children, that your present situation is not your final destination. The best is yet to come. As they plow through and struggle through their difficulties, they continue to be reminded by us that the best, their best, is yet to come. As advocates for our learners, we need to believe in this ourselves as we continue to push forward what is available and the provisions that we want our children to be given. And maybe then we can look as confident as this mother when the kids next dive into the fridge. She looks really proud of herself. I'd like to acknowledge the researchers who put together this paper. The reference is at the bottom of the slide. It's available at in the Asia Pacific Journal of Developmental Differences, which is available at the conference. So do browse, and it's a good read. And with that, I thank you very much for your time.